The folks I work for at the Klamath Water Users Association are responsible for a lot of this stuff that you're about to see. So what we're going to do is talk about what is called the on-project plan. Some of you may have been to other meetings about this in the past. The one thing I'll say right now is that this process has been ongoing for a long time, and it's on a schedule going back well over a year or more, actually a couple of years. So we've had this planned out, and part of this process is a series of public meetings. It so happens this one falls now when, frankly, I think a lot of people are a lot more concerned about what's going to happen this water year as opposed to in the future under this plan that we're looking to create. So I apologize for the timing of that. I think we will touch a little bit on this water year, and then at the end of this presentation, Holly Cannon from QAPA can talk a little bit about the programs this year, the water user mitigation program, and what's happening there. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background and how we got here and why we're doing what we're doing. And then I'm going to turn it over to some other folks to talk about the status and the schedule. This presentation won't be about the adjudication or the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement in full, or this year. But again, we're going to have time at the end for questions. I don't, anything's on the table. What we're trying to do is inform you about the progress of this program and what it might mean to you in the future. So we're happy to deal with those kind of things as they come up, and we'll try to talk a little bit about this year. So we'll do introductions here in a minute. I'll talk about background. Then Mark will talk about the plan itself, the committee, who's helping work and guide this plan. It will go through all these different bullets here. And we're going to be efficient. We're going to try to do it as best we can and get through it and leave plenty of time for questions. So, introductions, the Klamath Water and Power Agency, who is actually your host, Holly Cannon. Holly, raise your hand. Holly's over there. I'm Greg Addington. I work for the Klamath Water Users Association. We are in the same building, one electric building in town. So the project team, the folks that are doing the nuts and bolts and the heavy lifting on developing a plan, and we'll see what all that is. I'll just do some introductions. Mark Van Camp is right here. You're going to hear from Mark in a minute with MBK Engineers. Also, Sarah, raise your hand. Sarah Harper, MBK Engineers, who is the brains of the outfit, perhaps. Mark Oliver, CH2M Hill. Mark's over there. Dan Keppen. Dan Keppen helps out on the team. Mark Deutschman from Houston Engineering is not here. Mr. Ganon, Bill Ganon. Most of you know, and then Paul Simmons, who's not here as well, is also part of the team that is helping craft this and make it work. QAPA board members, I'm not sure. Bill Heine is here somewhere.
And Gary Derry.
And Gary Derry. So those are two of the 5 QAPA board members. The others are Gary Wright, Ed Baird, and Rocky Liskey. Okay, so background. I said we weren't going to talk a lot about the agreement, and we're not here to necessarily debate things, but again, you need to know where this is coming from and why it's here. So, one thing I'll point out is that this was all contemplated and negotiated, frankly, before adjudication outcomes, which we had last year. There was a lot of unknowns, and there still are a lot of unknowns related to water supply. But the idea was, and you're going to see some more of this when I get to a slide here in a minute, but this seems like a pretty easy thing to say, provide a firm water supply, right? It's really hard to do in the Klamath project, as I think most of you guys know. So what we want to do is we want protection, and here it's protection of water supply for in-stream rights. So in other words, we got these biological opinions, we got flows that go down the Klamath River. We want a block of water, and we want a block of water that's protected from those things that we can work with. We need ESA coverage. I'm here to tell you, in my professional opinion, the Endangered Species Act is not going away anytime soon. As much as we might all not like it and want it to go away, I think it's a reality we have to deal with. The KVRA, the rationale for this on-project plan was we have to be able to survive. You all need to have some security between here and a day in the future where maybe we can make some changes to the Endangered Species Act that benefit folks. But right now, it's Band-Aids from year to year. And again, sustainable agriculture and refuge operations. The refuges are part of this. I frankly politically think they have to be. I mean, we have, water rights are what they are. But refuges not having water is not a good option for any of us. So the refuges are going to be part of this, and their supply is sort of tied in with the project. So funding. Why are we here? Where's the money come from to do all this? So what we said in the settlement negotiations was, look, you know, many of you remember the Bureau of Reclamation had a water bank. You know, it's in 2000, I think 2 or 3 to 2007. They ran this water bank as part of a biological opinion. The National Marine Fisheries Service said, you got to provide us with 25, 50, 75, 100,000 acre feet of water, and it ratcheted up every year, regardless of the hydrology. Didn't matter if it was the wettest year we ever saw on record. We had to provide 100,000 acre feet of water from groundwater or setting land aside. And we said, that's ridiculous. We think we can do it better. We think, and so be careful what you ask for. Here we are. The funding from this is coming from the Bureau of Reclamation through QAPA. We said, look, we can develop a plan, we can get the right people that know the Klamath project, that know how the water works, and guided by districts and people that use the water, and we think we can come up with a plan. But we shouldn't have to pay for that ourselves. So, I mean, that's the funding that's coming from the Bureau of Reclamation. And again, ultimately, we're trying to align the supply with the demand. No involuntary shortages. That is the goal of this whole program, and that's the way it has to work, or it doesn't work. I mean, to go forward, that has to be where we land. It's no involuntary shortages. Okay. So you'll hear the on-project plan area, and it's just, that's the descriptor of this area here. These are lands that are served from the Klamath Lake or the Klamath River, from the Klamath system. It does not include the east side, the Horsefly Lanzo Valley, because those lands are irrigated from Clear Lake and Gerber. And what we're always talking about here is the Klamath, with Upper Klamath Lake on the Suckers and the Coho and the Klamath River. So these are the lands that we're talking about here.
There's a copy of that in the back.
Copy of that in the back, Mark says. Okay. All right. So again, this is background. This is why are we doing what we're doing. So what I'm going to show you here, I got to give you a couple of, there's some assumptions that go into what I'm going to show you here. We wanted to look back and say, how is our water supply, surface water supply, tied to what's actually happening out there? You know, what is the hydrology like, the snowpack and the precipitation? And so what I did is I picked May 1st, and that was just me picking a date, and I went back and looked at all this stuff. I picked May 1st because at that point we kind of got what we got, I would say, as far as snow and water. And then the other assumption I made was 400,000 acre feet of demand in that area that you saw on that map. That number, some years we don't use that much, some years we use a little more than that, but that was, I think, a safe number to just use to be able to compare apples to apples. So 1992 and 94, go ahead, Sarah, with those two. So 1992 suckers were listed as endangered in Upper Klamath Lake, but the coho were not yet listed in the Klamath River. So what you see is 1992, look at that snowpack number, 1%. Precip was 68%. And our supply in the project, this is before me, and a lot of you know it better than me, but about 95%, I think, because of some restrictions on the lake, because the suckers can draw it down so far. I think towards the end of that season, there was some curtailments in the project. 1994 was the second worst year on record, and I'll qualify that and say up to today. And it was, we got through the 100% of the supply for that area for the Klamath project from surface water. So 2001, go ahead, Sarah. We all know that practically speaking, that number is zero. The 20% is technically I think August, September, there was about 75,000 acre-feet of water delivered late in the season. But the reality and the impacts of that year are zero. But so you can see the hydrology for that year. And I'll point out this, the asterisks of 2001, 10, and 13. I highlight those because those, from a water supply standpoint, up to now, are the worst years we've seen as far as supply in the Klamath project. So I lumped together 2002 through 2007 because I talked about the water bank that the Bureau ran. So every year, regardless of hydrology, there was some amount of groundwater pumped in those years, or some land set aside. So go ahead. So you can see, in that period of time, wide range of snowpack, and I'll say the SWE snow water equivalent, which is how much water is in the snow. I'm not technical, I just say snowpack. So you can see it's a pretty wide range, up to almost 200%, but we never had a full supply in those years from surface water. Okay, so now here's the interactive. Now some of you have seen this probably more than one time, but so you gotta help me here. So 2008, we had 178% snowpack, 109% precipitation. Does anybody want to guess what that supply number is? Anyone? Go ahead. 90%. 178% snowpack. Okay, so 2009 we dropped back to 105%. Any guesses on this number?
100.
Go ahead. 100. You're a winner.
I've seen this 5 times.
100% in 2009. So then we come to 2010, our snowpack on May 1st, 110%. What's that number going to be? Go ahead. 47%. 110% snowpack, 47% supply. Okay, 2011, 210% snowpack. That's what I'm talking about. Go ahead. There we go. So we know if we get over 200%, we should be okay. In 2012, we had 96% snowpack, 90% surface water supply. And then last year, look at this number, 28%. Look at that number, 22% in 2001. Go ahead. 83%. So what I do when I give this to those of you that haven't seen it is say, now how do you make sense of that? What does this have in common? What do these numbers have in common? And the answer is absolutely nothing. Okay, there's no rhyme or reason to this. And some of you have figured it out by now, but the reason for this, do we all know? The Endangered Species Act, biological opinions. So, and I tell people, so I started with the Klamath Water Users in 2005. In that, almost going on 9 years now. In that amount of time, the biological opinion we have today is the 4th 10-year biological opinion I've seen. The 4th 10-year biological opinion. In other words, here's a 10-year biological opinion, and it changes in 2 years for a variety of different reasons. That's why you see no rhyme or reason over in that column over there. Now, what I'd like to say is that we're getting to a place, I believe, and a lot of people have worked really hard, including folks in my office, the districts, the Bureau of Reclamation, I believe really stepped up this last go around and working with the regulatory agencies, NIMS and Fish and Wildlife. And we're actually, I believe, to a place where the hydrology will reflect supply a lot better. And you see that when you compare 2013 to 2001. So at the end of last year, I'm feeling good. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm feeling good. Just go ahead and click them all, Sarah. We finished the year last year at the end of October. The lake was a foot higher than the previous year. A foot higher. I mean, I'm like, okay. we're gonna get that lake full. And I think if we even have, even kind of a crappy winter, I think we're gonna fill the lake, because the new opinion focuses on filling the lake. I didn't know we were gonna have what we're having right now, and so, it's difficult. So, again, the hydrology, when you look at storage and snowpack, for the 2013 water year, it was worse than 2001, 2010. We had a significantly better supply. Reclamation estimated there was about 100,000 acre-foot deficit. They were about right on that. We still had to pump groundwater. We pumped 64,000 acre-feet of groundwater, and we think we got about 10,000 acre-feet from setting line aside. At the end of the day, by the end of December, the refuge had 20 to 30,000 acre-feet, but that all came pretty late, post October. So kind of where we've been kind of last year, this has been the rationale for we have to do better. We have to do better for the people that rely on the water. Where am I at? Go ahead, Sarah. Okay, so that said, here we talk a little bit about where we're at today. And again, we're going to launch into this plan and you're going to see some more numbers. But what these are, this goes back to 1961 on this side, chronologically, to 2013. This is the inflow to Upper Klamath Lake. So you have actual, no, how do I say it, Mark?
Actual net inflow.
Actual net inflow. So you can see the range of inflows to the lake, and then you get to the very end, 2013, so, 2014, and that's today where we're at. That's the actual up to today, basically, and the forecast going forward. And what it tells you, go to the next slide. This is just in the order of magnitude. What it tells you is right now, look with the inflow we've observed since October and the projections for the end of the season were worse than 1992. That can change. It's January still, but today it's not good. And again, we'll try to address that a little more later to the best of our ability. So I think I'm done. I don't know. Again, the on-project plan is a piece of the KBRA. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not trying to hide it. It is a way to live with a supply of water, to get a block that we can count on. It's not about anything else. I mean, you can focus on dams, you can focus on Indians, you can focus on whatever you want to focus on. I can just tell you the guys I work for, we're focused on water supply. That was our job. And so that's what we did, and that's what you're going to see from Mark here. So, go ahead.
Thanks, Greg. There's one more slide we want to walk through that kind of compares what's happened in the recent past with the supplies you would receive under the KBRA or the OPP. And this is going to be really tough for about half you folks. I don't know, about halfway back, can you see it? Dan?
You're talking wrong guy.
Oh, yeah, well. All right, so I'll do my best to explain it and still try to move on. What I have up here are bars from 2001 to 2011. Those bars in blue are actual diversions into the project from the Klamath River. The crosshatch bar, the green, is groundwater pumping that you've done historically, and the red shows cropland idling that you have done to try to align supply and demand. Okay, those are actual estimates. As you can see in 2001, it was very bad. The black tick mark you see up around the 350,000 range is the quantity of water under the KBRA that the on-project folks would receive. So you can see in, I don't like looking at 2001. I hope most of you folks want to just throw that out of your mind, your memories. I don't like looking at it. I either look before 2001 or after to learn my lessons. So if I look at this, in 2002, we didn't have enough water under the KBRA to meet what you folks had diverted historically. But if you look at that 10-year period from 2002 to 2011, we've done the math, and historically, you pump 322,000 acre-feet of water to help meet your needs. If that on-project plan, the KBRA was in place, we believe we wouldn't have had any crop idling, any need to do that, and we would have only had to pump, 170,000 acre-feet of water. What that tells me is there would still be 150 more thousand acre-feet of water in the ground available for a future year, years like 2014. The main point I'm trying to bring in this slide is we need to learn from these lessons. QAPA has been implementing these water banks. They've learned a lot of things, and we as consultants are trying to help guide the future with those lessons learned. So, in preparing the on-project plan, QAPA's board, which is made up of folks in this room, gave us an advisory committee of, and I know most of you probably can't read it, but it's roughly 15 representatives from the districts that are within the on-project plan. As consultant, we need your folks on the ground experience. I mean, it's not our plan, it's your plan. So we're looking for as much help as we can get, and the group has been very helpful, and believe me, they tell us when we're off base. At least one of them. So the first thing we did, I'm sorry, there's a lot of words here, I know half you can't read, so I'm going to go fast. They said, you, consultant, shall prepare this plan with these goals and objectives in mind. And it took a little bit to write these down and get them approved by everybody. But it's long-term viability of the agriculture. No involuntary, uncompensated reductions. That's part of the KBRA. Equitable treatment within and across districts. Minimize third-party impacts. Use groundwater in a long-term and sustainable manner. I mean, all key things, and that helped guide us. Okay, so you're going to hear me say things about this limitation on diversions. What did the water users agree to in the whole settlement? It's referred to as limitation on diversions. It is the reliable water supply. It is something you will have on March 1st when this goes forward. I know the folks in the back can't read it, but the left-hand side would be representative of a drier year. The right-hand side would be a wetter year. The water supply goes to agriculture only, would go from 330,000 acre-feet, right here, up to 385,000 acre-feet in the wetter years. If 2001 was to repeat itself, this is all based on a forecasted inflow for April through September, based on the March forecast. So once that March 1st forecast comes out, you can go into this graph and figure out what water supply we have to work with, or you have to work with. So if 2001 was to repeat itself with a March 1st forecast of a little over 300,000 acre-feet, the allocation, the reliable water supply to the project would be roughly 335,000 acre-feet versus what we saw in 2001. Now, if you put up all the other historical diversions from 1961 to 2000, that's the red diamonds up here. So you can see the more demand in drier years. We know that from the agricultural side, you're going to need more water during those drier years. But obviously, there's more water needed for the fisheries. That was all part of the negotiations. That difference between that reliable water supply and this historical diversion is what we're viewing as what this on-project plan has to meet, to make sure your demands are met. You may see that again. Okay, so just to give you a quick summary. We started back in September 2011, so we've been at this for over 2 years now. We've gone through this technical memo process with our committee, and it just goes out to OWRD, the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife. So everybody's seeing this work as we move forward. We've got technical memos which are all available on QAPA's website or at their office. First one is the goals and objectives. We have water supply and operations, water requirements. TM4 is a key one. That is where we calculate what we call the supplemental water need. That's the difference between the reliable water supply and what we view as the demand. We look in TM5 as more of the recent surface water flow path, which is what has been gone forward recently, trying to understand all the conservation you folks have implemented in the last 10 to 15 years. And TM6, we looked at options. We are here because TM7 has been out to draft and it's with the committee now and it's soon to go to OPAC. And we will have a summary report out next month. It says January, but that's in a few days, so I can't commit to that. This has been a public process. Like I said, a little over 2 years. We've had 15 public meetings. 11 of those are OPAC meetings, which are all noticed and held at QAPA's office. We've had 4 public meetings before this one and last night, so we'll be up to 6 here. In addition, we've had 6 newsletters, Dan, appropriately called opportunities, so for OPP. That was quite an insight by Mr. Kepping. Okay, so again, here's that limitation on diversions. I mentioned the supplemental water need. That is what we're trying to figure out. How do we meet that need? So the key words are line, supply, and demand. All right, Sarah. So in TM6, where we started trying to figure out what are the options for you folks to align that supply and demand. Conservation efficiency. We always need to look at that. We'll always be pushed by state agencies, federal agencies, and you've been doing it. Storage projects. A lot of storage investigations have been occurring, have occurred, and nothing seems to be getting built. Obviously, we have an underground groundwater supply. There's other activities identified in the KBRA, like water transfers that we investigated, and then what we refer to as demand management. Some folks call it fallowing. I don't like using the F word. So we call it crop idling, and hopefully it's temporary, short-term crop idling, as that's the other word for demand management. So out of the process working with OPAC, our 15-member committee, the ones that came out as feasible using criteria such as cost, time frame. Keep in mind, we're trying to get these projects implemented in place by 2022. Okay, and let me emphasize, this is not happening tomorrow, this project. It's not happening next week, next year. There's a time frame here, and we're going to explain the time frame a little bit better. So far, the projects that came out as feasible, we found a couple projects that should be investigated further. They need to be investigated by Fish and Wildlife in a recirculation project down on the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge. There's a TID research project that needs to be worked and discussed with TID and other folks. In the groundwater, which was a feasible option, obviously you've been using it. Along with this work, there's been a significant effort by the U.S. Geological Survey to analyze the use of groundwater. It is a very technical model, and I think it's a very useful tool to help meet some of the goals that the On-Project Plan Advisory Committee put on us. Use groundwater in a sustainable manner. That is a very useful tool. There are folks out there that are already using groundwater that do have the right to surface water, may have been using surface water in the past. If through this project we can facilitate that would be a good thing, a feasible part. And then, of course, the demand management, which we hope occurs very infrequently, and we're going to show you some of that frequency based on our estimates, but it does need to be some permanent arrangements. Storage was not determined feasible. Very limited supplies for storage, especially now with the final order determination out. Very difficult regulatory process, environmental impacts, and one of the big ones is I just don't think it's capable to get a project in place by 2022, a storage project in that time frame. And of course, the high cost associated with storage. We're not saying don't build storage. As an engineer, I'd love to have more storage. It's just not the right thing to meet the goals and objectives of the OPP. If the Klamath water users and QAPA could find some partnerships to pursue storage, we would like to see that. Okay, as part of the whole project, the whole on-project plan, we've done a lot of background work, and what we get to is what we have recently referred to as the proposed program. That name may end up changing because there's some little bit of conflict, but we're working on it. It's the action. It is, what are we doing with this? If you read any part of this volumes of material, TMs 1 through 7, I'd focus you on the last 20 pages of TM 7. Okay? That's where the action is. I need to emphasize part of this program is the development of the plan. First we got a development, and that's where we're just about done here in March of 2014. From 2014 to 2015, we got environmental work to be done pursuant to federal requirements and state requirements. And then we get to the implementation stage. That's from about 2015 to 21. Okay, so we're looking out a ways. If this all works out, certain things take place, that limitation is guaranteed, limitation on diversion. If that reliable water supply is guaranteed, then we're into the administration of this program from 2022 on. You know, and don't hesitate, if you have questions, we can stop in between. I'll get off track, but that's right. Okay, summary of the proposed program. It's a permanent program to align the supply and demand. We've estimated the supplemental water between 0 and 100,000 acre-feet, roughly. In half the years, we don't need any supplemental water. That limitation on diversion is adequate to meet your needs. And of course, we're avoiding uncompensated shortages to water users. That is part of the KBRA, and that is part of this plan. So, I mentioned the supplemental water supply. For you in the back, it's 1961 to 2010. And it goes from the bottom of 0 up to 120. This is just to show the series, the time series of how we've calculated the supplemental water. This is what we're trying to meet as part of this plan. To do that, we came up with this concept of blocks. Blocks of water, or time frames, to guide the implementation of this program. So we tried to put quantities in there. Certain things should take place first, or we should understand certain things first before we move to enter contracts for other items. So, the ideas of blocks. Block A, the first thing we need to do is understand the conservation that's taken place historically, since 2002. Because our supplemental water estimate is high, is conservative, and we know activities, a lot of money has been invested in the basin to be more efficient with our water use. So we want to, and since 2002 through 2011, there's been all these water bank activities that has caused it quite complicated to evaluate how much water has been saved through those conservation activities, how much surface water has been conserved. So, the first block, Block A, conservation and other selected measures, past and future, so we're talking about those recirculation projects, our best estimate, conservative estimate, is 20,000 acre feet. Block B, which is the first level of groundwater pumping, based on that USGS model that includes OWRD guidelines to not impact your neighbor by the certain drawdown requirements. It is a very complicated model. The estimate that we've used for the plan is the 50,000 acre feet. There is more groundwater that can be pumped and can be pumped depending on the conditions from the prior years. So we have a block C of 25,000 more acre feet of groundwater. And last, the last resort, block D, for demand management, to get us to that 100,000 acre feet of supplemental water need is our estimate is 30,000 acre feet. Now, you might say, well, just to quickly point out that that adds up to a little bit more than 100,000. And we need some duplication, and I'm going to try to explain that a little bit later. So key elements of the plan, measurement and monitoring. There is a certain level, or what I refer to as appropriate level of measurement, to help people manage the water supply. It needs to continue, it needs to be improved on. We are suggesting that you, QAPA, coordinate and collaborate with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, who's doing a water management plan and improved measurement as we speak. The U.S. Geological Survey, who's come up with the model and does groundwater level measurement. Oregon Water Resources Department, we need to work with them. California Department of Water Resources, and others. If there's others out there doing measurement, we just need to work with them. We don't want to reinvent anything. You adjust the program as necessary. I'll probably say that 2 or 3 more times. For such a long program, we got 10 years before it fully gets implemented or administered. Just adjust as you go. We don't have all the answers today, but we have a good start right there. So the key elements to Block A, pursue those conservation projects, figure out what we got existing conservation. We've had a lot of discussion and debate within our technical team how much you have done, and I believe it's significant. Let's understand how much those recirculation projects do reduce Klamath River water diversions. Okay, it's important. We're only talking about Klamath River water at this point. They may not do anything during those extreme dry years, but during some of the middle years, they might be helpful to help you folks meet the demand. And then the additional efforts of potential permanent switch groundwater. Again, that target quantity, based on our review at TM 5 and 6, our work effort is 20,000 acre feet. And that is, in my opinion, conservative, because we want to not underestimate the next blocks of water we need to secure your supply in the future. So talking about groundwater, we've combined key elements for Block B and C. There's a definition in the KBRA. It was a heavily negotiated item. The folks, the tribes and others knew that the on-project folks, by reducing the surface water supply for the settlement, would turn to groundwater. And so there was a concern of pumping too much groundwater might have an impact on some of the natural springs down into the river, at the river. In fact, some of the springs, the key ones, down by Copco, I believe, on the other side of the river. Normally you think of the river as a barrier, and also springs up in Upper Klamath Lake. So they were very concerned about that. Bottom line is we have to avoid adverse impacts. Adverse impacts is defined in the KBRA. The work that's been done by the USGS, the modeling runs, supporting the pumping of up to 75,000 acre feet, says we don't even get close to that. Okay? We won't have that adverse impact. Obviously, to make these arrangements under Block C and D, we're going to have to go out with contractual agreements to you folks. QAPA is just willing participants. And that's how this is all gonna work, for compensation. I already identified that the GS model includes all the drawdown limitations, so it uses those. It comes up with a regional distribution of pumping, which we'll show here in a second. It also, we found through our research studies, there is adequate capacity out there in the project already. In Oregon, under Oregon water rights, and in California, to make these quantities happen. There's a map, the next map I think, wow, that you obviously can't see, but it's in the back as well. It is a map broken up by districts or regions within the project. And the USGS model, excuse me, identifies percentages or estimated percentages of how best to optimize this groundwater aquifer. So that is a target for entering those contracts. If you were to, based on that model, to exceed those quantities too much, you'd start causing problems within the aquifer. All right, the key elements for Block D, the last resort item, which we hope is very infrequent, but may have to occur. One of the reasons it may have to occur is because the groundwater conditions. If we have contracts with the potential of 75,000 acre feet of water, obviously there could be other people pumping water. Conditions could go differently, and you might have to toggle between demand management and groundwater. We can't predict for certainty future hydrology. We're using historical hydrology to do our best estimates. Again, the contractual agreements with the willing participants. This will, as I'll describe here in a bit, somewhat of a bid and offer process out into the future to enter into the long-term permanent agreement. Target quantity under Block D, our estimate for need is 30,000 acre feet. Okay, another slide you can't see, but it is in the back. These bars are the same as the supplemental water quantity we showed. But now we're trying to represent how those supplemental water needs are met. The bottom blue is the 20,000 acre feet under Block A, the conservation. The next block is the 50,000 acre feet of estimated groundwater pumping. And then you can see there are only 7 years out of this history of 50 years where we have to get into greater groundwater pumping than 50,000 or get into demand management. 7 out of 50. And boy, you know, it's tough for me to count this one until we figure out how close we are on Block A. And that's why that is our first step. If we can do better on conservation, you can knock almost 3 of those years off. And then we put it in the chronological order, and the key point from this slide, I believe I said this earlier, but in 50% of the years, your demands are met without doing anything. The limitation on diversion, the reliable water supply is there under that allocation. The other 50% of the years is where we're taking making these activities, calling on these contracts. Okay, proposed program, I mentioned, implementation is from after we complete the environmental documentation and the Bureau of Reclamation approves the plan, and the Fish and Wildlife needs to approve the plan, and we've been working with them to do that. We will need to better define those blocks 2 years from now, a year and a half from now. We will, during that time period, the 2015 to 2021, enter into agreements to ask landowners how much will it cost for you to agree not to take surface water in a certain amount of years. Either pump groundwater or possibly not irrigated on. We need to continue measurement and monitoring during that implementation portion of this. The administration of the whole program and plan is from 2022 on. And during that period, you're going to be, the QAPA team will be figuring out what the supplemental water need is each year. We're going to go through a little example, continue measurement and monitoring, and of course adapt to changing conditions or lessons learned. So key activities out in implementation, confirm block A, meaning I hope the 20,000 is short. Maybe it's 30, maybe it's 40,000 from the activities. Once we determine block A, QAPA then has a better handle on how many acres or acre feet of water we need to get under blocks B through D. How much groundwater, how much crop idling do we need? If A is bigger, B through D is smaller. And then the lessons learned, and there it is, the adaptive management. The contractual arrangements. In the draft TM7 that we're working with the committee, these are perpetual contracts. So the water users have the flexibility, the QAPA has the flexibility. Willing participants. We need people to be involved though. It's going to be a bid or offer process is the current idea. We have, when that does happen, and you'll see in TM7 if you ever take the time to read it, there's key contract terms in there that will help you understand what these mean. And the other key, Greg mentioned it, it requires funding. And that funding needs to come, and it would be an upfront payment to a water user to commit to this to a given number of acres if they so desire. Okay, you can't see this in the back, but so when we're out there in 2022, the idea is what is the structure? What is the organization structure? And the decision folks at the top is the way I understand right now is the 5-member QAPA board. That's the blue bubble at the top. The people getting all the information from other folks to help QAPA make those decisions is the QAPA staff in the middle there. Feeding into the QAPA staff on that side is what we've referred to as an operations committee. It's very important from my standpoint. The people that can take the A Canal or Station 48 or the North Canal or 80 Canal, they're the ones that need to be providing information to the QAPA staff to make sure they're living within that limitation on diversion, because that is part of the agreement. Klamath Water Users Association is over here on the right. With their involvement in all this, the background they have are going to be very important to the QAPA staff in helping make those decisions. And down on the bottom, not that they're any less important, districts and growers, obviously QAPA will be looking for their input, and we have the agencies in Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Water Resources Department, and the California Department of Water Resources. Okay, so what are they going to do? The first thing to do going into a year is March 1st, you get that forecast. They then estimate their demand. They need to understand, work with the refuge, as Greg said. The project folks, QAPA needs to provide the refuge allocation through the facilities. And then determine which blocks of water we're going to use, which contracts to call on to make up that shortage. There will be, the idea is to have enough contracts out there that groundwater distribution can be met, possibly, hopefully avoid duplicating calls on a given parcel in consecutive years. That's why there's that overlap of quantity I mentioned. Going to continue measurement, monitoring diversions and the limitation on diversions. We've pretty much checked off the adverse impact, but I'm sure we'll have to get back to that. The reporting, Part of this will undoubtedly, as it's a settlement to the state of Oregon, with the parties into the state of Oregon adjudication, we'll need to report the diversions so that they're assured we're living within the limitation on diversion. And then back to the adaptive management. So under just one example here, I just want to run through real quick. Assume the hydraulic conditions, previous 2 years were dry, required groundwater pumping. Groundwater levels are down and it's been hit pretty hard. Let's just assume this is back to that 2011 year. So during this implementation stage, now back a few years, so we're gonna already have figured out how much conservation we've done. We've got our contracts all lined up with folks. So we move on and the operation committee looks at the work we've done that's in TM4. And if you look at a sample year similar to 2001, you would find that it shows 70,000 acre feet of supplemental water. Now, assuming block A, we got the 20,000 from improved efficiency or recirculation project, we now lower our supplemental water need projects that we have to implement by 20,000. So now we're down to 50,000 acre feet of water. So QAPA has to sit back and say, well, okay, we need to, how do we make up that water? One of the goals is to is to maintain agriculture. So let's pump the groundwater first. Look for contracts that have groundwater available to them. So we're going to choose groundwater, and we pumped it heavy, or it was pumped, levels are down. Instead of pumping all 50,000 or 50,000 of supplemental water need, we're only going to pump 30,000 because of the condition of the groundwater, and we'd have to call on some lands that have already been paid upfront money to not surface irrigate and dry farm or nothing. Continue measuring and monitoring and report to OWRD the activities that have happened. That is how it go each year. Hopefully in some years, adequate supply, no actions have to be taken. Okay, funding and schedule. Greg touched on this. I have to, the program cannot be implemented unless there are funds available. That's the bottom line. So I tried to give you a schedule. I've given you the best schedule I have. I know my schedule from QAPA is get this done in the best draft form next month so we can keep moving with the environmental documentation so we don't slow it down. As far as the schedule of funding, I'm not aware of a secure schedule, and there may be questions about that, and maybe we can take those. I mentioned the environmental review. There is, under federal law, we have to do the National Environmental Policy Act through reclamation, and also because part of the projects in California, we have to do what is called CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. We are looking to start what they call scoping meetings, possibly in May. Correct, Mark? That's our goal. With it to be completed. This says in mid to late 2015. I'm going to just suggest it will probably be late 2015. But we need to get it done in 2015. That gets us to questions and discussions. I hope we didn't bore you too much. I will emphasize this as questions and discussions, not necessarily questions and answers. Yes, sir.
How does the change from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation affect the facts and figures that you presented on the history?
I'm assuming you fully irrigated the crop, so the consumptive use of the crop is the same. You would like to think that the diversions are less, which would help us if those have occurred in recent years. And you also have less tailwater. So somebody may be relying on tailwater from a flood irrigation upstream. And we gotta understand that as well. The other thing that could be occurring is you might have better distribution through that sprinkler irrigation, which may result in less groundwater recharge. And so all that has to be understood, and that's why I've probably said adaptive management way too many times, but that's why we can't sit here and tell you this is the way it is, because those changes have occurred in the last 10 years. And 10 years is not a very long period of record to study these things. Now, I know there's more questions than that.
Maybe everybody else is smarter than me.
You know, that was a good question.
One thing I'll add to, I mean, this doesn't happen, it is tied with the whole KVRA, which requires legislation. It requires Congress to act. You're settling water right issues with tribes. You can't, there's a lot of things that all connect to this. So this doesn't necessarily happen if the plan doesn't go through, if KVRA doesn't go through. We will be better off for having done this, for having gone through this process. We're gonna be a lot more sophisticated about water use, how we use it, where we use it, what we're doing with it. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's good if we do it as opposed to if someone else is doing it. There was a question.
I have a question, yeah, kind of related to this. Since the water's been adjudicated, it seems to me that adjudication doesn't mean much. Like with the ESA, and all this, if there's not enough water to go around, then how does that pertain to the adjudication?
Recall what Greg said earlier, that this whole settlement was being done at a time that the outcome of the adjudication was unknown.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, what about, I'm talking about now.
Well,
So my adjudication still means nothing?
No, I'd ask Bill to get ready, maybe weigh in on this, but what I'll say is, it's still a little bit unknown, to be fair. I mean, one of the things is what this does, and I don't have this slide in there, but, we made a stipulated settlement with the Klamath tribes. They have, and they received from the state, a water right for certain elevations in Upper Klamath Lake. And if they enforce those rights based on what they got, I think last year we'd irrigated maybe a couple of weeks. We didn't have to worry about that because we have a stipulated settlement that becomes permanent if the KVRA goes through. So we are senior to 70 or 80,000?
82,700 acres.
To be specific. And so, no, that matters. And some of that water helped us get through last year. There's no question it did. But it's so new that it's hard to quantify it. It's hard to know how much you got and how much you can count on. And for every good bit of it, you have this sort of gorilla in the room with the tribal water right that you got to worry about. So, I mean, that was one of the things when we did this. He said, we can make the ESA go away tomorrow. We still have adjudication, and the tribes have a time immemorial water right. Whether you think that's right, wrong, or like it or don't like it, it's a reality we have to deal with. When we were sitting in this room, we looked around the West. We looked in Montana at adjudications. We looked in Arizona, Wyoming, at tribal involvement in adjudication and water rights settlements. And I mean, we did our homework. They don't lose. So even if we went into court and we fight them and we knocked it down to half of what their water right is, I mean, we still have tremendous problems in a lot of years. So we kind of said, look, if we can, let's not roll the dice with a judge. If we can come up with something, we can live with. And that's part of it. Bill, would you add anything about how the
Well, I think the adjudication means that Mark used the terminology compensated. You'll be compensated if you agree to participate in this program. And the only reason you're going to get compensated is because the United States has got to come up with a way to meet the Endangered Species Act, to deal with Tribal Trust Act, that kind of thing. And if you didn't have a water, you didn't have now to the Oregon Supreme Court and the Federal Circuit Court, or the Circuit Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and the order of determination, all saying you have a property interest in that water right